Hey everybody, welcome to another video in the 0 to 100 web development series. Now that we have our style sheet placed in a more appropriate location, we can start to expand on it. In this video, we're going to be looking at our recent news section, and creating the rough layout for it. This is going to be quite a long video and pretty heavy CSS packed, so pull up your trousers and grab a drink because your fingers might be sore after this one. So the title on the section is kind of dull. Oh, before I get into anything, just want to note I have an extension called Live Page on the Chrome store for about $3.99 Canadian. It automatically updates your browser anytime you make an HTML change or a CSS change, and therefore you don't have to actually refresh the page. You can have them side by side and do it all in one fluid movement. Right. So anyways, with that out of the way, the title on the section is kind of dull, this recent news. And so let's change it from an H3, or sorry, an H6 to an H2, I believe it is, an H2. The reason for this is using an H2 is more semantically correct. Let's continue and add an article. And this article is going to have a H3 tag, and that's going to have title, article, title. And then we are going to create a section. Oh, I actually want to put a class on here, class equals title. And here we will have class equals content. This is some sample article content. And here we're going to have an anchor tag. We're just going to set the href equal to, it's not going to link to anything, so we're just going to have it to a # or hashtag. And inside here we are going to have read more. And we're actually going to put a class on here as well. I like to put ID and class attributes before any of the tags parameters. I think those are more important to a web developer right off the bat than anything else following it. Yes or no, it depends on the developer, I'm assuming. I'm not too sure if there is a difference in processing times. I doubt it would be very, very minimal. Class equals read underscore more. We save that and we notice that it automatically refreshes. This doesn't look good at all. This looks pretty terrible. It's plain Jane and it can look a heck of a lot better. So let's go ahead into our CSS here. That's it for our markup. We have our H3 title tag. We have a section content and a class of read more that has a read more button. So essentially they're going to click on this button and it's going to take them to the actual article page. This is just going to be an article preview. So in our, did we put an ID on our recent news? We did. So in our CSS, let's target our recent news and have a direct descendant into our title class. So that is going to be this recent news here. Let us add, I'm kind of thinking we want it to be bolded in the center with kind of an underline to it. So let's say font weight, to add a bold to any text, we modify the font weight and we say bold. I've never tried bolder. It sounds very interesting. So we've saved that. Am I not targeting this correctly? Oh, right, because I didn't add a class to this either. Class equals title. So now you may be wondering, we're having two title classes. And yes, we are. We could technically reference this class globally and say all titles should be bolded. And then we could just say class, period title bold. But since we're specifying the scope of these title classes individually, we can therefore then modify them independently. Font weight bold, we give that a save. I think it's not going to refresh because I haven't made any changes. Title is going to be what else do we have? Underline. So do an underline. Now we could technically make this an underline tag to it, but that's going to, the reason for that being is when we do text underline, we don't have control on how far that bar is below our text. So if we want it 10 pixels below the text or 15 pixels below the text, we actually can't control that. It's just a uniform distance, a uniform position. So another way to do it would be to put a border bottom on our element. So say border bottom 2 pixels solid black. Give that a save. We notice here, is this font weight not? I guess, oh, that is bolded, I'm assuming. Oh, it's an H3 tag, so it is already bolded. The problem is that since we're using an H3 tag, it is going to have a margin, which is okay, I'm assuming. But we can see that our border is going all the way across. And, well, we know the reason for that is being because this element is in fact, it's by default display block. Therefore, it's going to be 100% of the page width. We only want it to be to the end of here, essentially, just up to the end of the text. So in order for us to do that, we can just say, okay, well, we'll just have display of inline block. Therefore, we will have the block properties of a block element, but the width of the element will be conformed to however big we need it to be. So up to the recent news, which is perfect. This is awesome. Now, how do we modify how far it can be from the bottom of the text? We can use the padding attribute, because remember, padding is on the inside of the border and margins are on the outside of a border. So if we say padding bottom is 5 pixels, well, we notice there it gets a little farther away. What if we wanted it 10 pixels? It's a little farther away. Let's say we wanted it to be the underline a little bit wider on both sides. So not necessarily to the end of the text, but just a little bit overhanging. Well, we can say, okay, well, padding left is going to be, let's say, 10 pixels. And you can see now we're modifying the left. So padding is really great if you want to have boxes or borders or lines. It's very, very useful, very fun, and using the underline function is good, or not function, tag is good for semantics. So that way browsers or search engines, for that matter, can pick up on that underline and be like, this is important. And then in CSS, you can be, well, it's underlined because it's important, but we're going to use our own underline, and therefore you can override the default underline, if that makes sense. But we're not doing that in this case. Recent news isn't that important to us. It's important, but we'll use an H3 tag for it. We don't need to underline it using semantics. So we don't need this padding left. I'm just doing that for demonstrations. The padding bottom, though, I think we're going to leave that at 5 pixels. Now we want this to be centered. Now, how can we get this centered? We can't use a text align center because we're applying that text align center to our H2 tag, which is inline block. So that wouldn't make any sense to center text where the text is the same width as a container. Another option is to use absolute positioning, and that is one way of doing it. You can go ahead and do that. The way that I'm going to be doing it is I'm going to go back into my HTML, and I'm going to make a somewhat container class, or not class, I keep saying class, container element, and I'm going to cut and paste my H2 tag in there. And we are going to call this, we're actually going to say now that this div is going, now we didn't cover div, but div is essentially a division or a section. Doesn't really have semantic value, which is okay. That is perfectly fine. Actually, another way that I'm thinking about it would be to just use a span. And a span is kind of like a div, but more or less for inline stuff, or it doesn't really have the same properties as a div. Span is inline and div is more block, if I am not mistaken. But for the sake of this example, we're just going to go ahead and just make a div class equals title. So now all of our title attributes is going to be on this div, which is going to look kind of weird because now we can see that if we go into our spec element or editor, we notice that our title has a border bottom, has padding bottom. We don't really want any of that. So how can we do this? Well, what we can do is because we want these styles to be on our H2 tag. So we'll say recent underscore news, going down to the title, and inside that title, we're going to go down to the H2. And these are specific descendants because we know that we're not going to have more than one of these in here. So just being safe and specifying that the first title class and the first H2 tag in that title class, this is what we want. We're not targeting all the H2s in this title class because there's only going to be one H2. It's just better safe than sorry to just target the first one. So we'll say H2, and we're going to take all of our styles that we had here, copy or cut and paste, I should say. And then on our title, this is where we can apply our text aligned is center, because this div is going to have default display property of block, therefore being all the way across, and this H2 is going to be within there on an inline, and we can then position that inline within that block. Save that, and now we have our recent news in the middle, underlined to our liking. So just to kind of clarify how this works, we have our div class title, which is spanning all the way across. And inside we have our H2, which is an inline block. And because, think about a scroll here, think about your scroll bar. So the piece that you're actually moving is your recent news element, but the whole scroll bar is your div. So if we had a line top, a line bottom, a line middle. Really, really rough example on how it works, but it's the best I can do with what I got right now. Okay, and then before moving on, let's just add some spacing in between our recent news and our image slider here. So we're just going to target recent news. And we're just going to say margin. Actually, we're just going to padding top. Reason why I don't want to do margins is because if I ever want to have a border, it'll look a little bit, I don't think I will have a border, but it just looks a little bit neater to have our elements block to block stacking on top of each other, and just use padding for spacing. Padding top, and we'll just give it 25 pixels. That's good enough space right now. We can play around with it later once we actually implement our image slider with JavaScript. So now we got a recent news title done. That was a lot, actually, just to get some text in the middle. I think later down the line, when we actually look into making our own CSS framework, we won't have to do all of this. We can just say, yeah, if it has a class of title, it will be bolded and underlined. And if it has a class of centered, then it will do all that jazz for us. And we won't even have to worry about it. That's the nice part.